Good job, guys. Woohoo! Knock, knock. Hey man, how's it going?
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So today's the big day.
You bet.
So we've got a big route planned, but I actually don't know what it is.
Okay.
Before we get going, would you like to just real quickly fill me in what we're planning to do?
You bet. Let's go down this way. So I'm Grant McKenzie, and I'm the Director of Communications with Our Place Society, which is an organization that looks after and assists people who are struggling with homelessness, addiction, and severe mental health issues.
Victoria, you know, when we think about Victoria, we think about a lot of things. We don't necessarily think about that. We think about European style architecture. We think about gardens, but in fact, this is a very, very serious part of our landscape here, and I didn't want to not acknowledge that while doing this series, Bon Victoriage.
Yeah, so what we're going to look at today will be kind of like the pathways. You know, the pathways that people find themselves in and how they move forward.
So we're really going from like ground zero of people in a real emergency state all the way to leading very productive, healthy lives at the very...
Exactly, and that's really the goal that we aim for everyone.
I have to say, you're sounding very Scottish today, Grant.
Oh, interesting, yeah. Well, I've been in Canada for a long time. I came over in '76, so it's highly diluted, but it's still there. So this is Pandora.
Yeah.
So if we turn here, we'll head into the community centre.
Yeah.
And so this is really ground zero for people. You know, this is when people first sort of end up in homelessness. This is where they end up, and this is where we can first connect with them and try and build that trust with them to try and lift people out of where they're at.
Right.
And really move along. So this is our downtown community center here. So it's open from 7:30 in the morning till 7:30 at night, and then there's also overnight shelter beds as well for people to stay overnight. And so here is where we serve over 1,000 meals a day. So it is, and we also provide showers. Hey guys, we're not filming you. You know me. You know me. I work for Our Place. We're doing a thing for Our Place.
It's Victoria, finest place to be.
So we do.
Maybe we can go a little bit farther on.
Let's go a little farther.
Let's go a little bit further. We're filming for Our Place.
It's Our Place. We're doing a thing for Our Place. So Our Place is a drop-in community center for people. We serve over 1,000 meals a day here, every day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. We also provide hot showers. We're filming for Our Place.
We're filming for Our Place.
Just check it, okay? Thank you.
So we're not filming anybody. It's just
filming
Our Place.
Okay, let's try one more time, and then if it goes weird, then we'll carry on.
Sure. We serve over 1,000 meals a day. We also have access to showers, washrooms, clothing. We also have, we bring in medical professionals, doctors, nurses to help people treat their wound care. A lot of people won't go to hospitals because of trauma they've experienced in hospitals. So we have to bring the medical professionals down here to treat people. And this is the first step for people to try and rebuild their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we really want our place to be that place of connection for people. You know, it really is about building people's trust
Yeah.
and lifting them up. Now, it's become more challenging since COVID. Pre-COVID, none of the tents were here.
Right.
This all happened because of COVID. With the tents here, because there's just not enough housing or shelter for people. And so we're really starting to connect with a different sort of population, a much more harder to house population, and really trying to get them what we call pathways off Pandora. We want to work with people to lift them off of Pandora, to get them into the appropriate housing that they need, the supports that they need, so that they can, you know, reclaim their lives.
Yeah. Quick note, where are we going next?
So next we're going to my place.
My place next. Yep. I can understand, you know, nobody wants to be filmed in their most vulnerable moment.
Yeah, this is not a situation where people want to be.
Yeah.
And so there is an awful lot of anger that circulates because people are frustrated that this is where they've ended up. You know, and even though we're trying to help people, lift them up, a lot of times, especially if their addiction is heavy or their trauma is heavy, they don't always see that, because so many of the people have been put down by red tape. You know, they've learned to distrust institutions, and even though we're one of the sort of not-for-profit institutions that's there to help, they still see us as being a bit like the man.
But once you have that trust, then there is a pathway to the light.
There is, and I mean, and COVID gave us that opportunity because
Did it?
the government bought a bunch of hotels, or at least a bunch of hotels. So a lot of the people that I've known for a lot of years are now housed, and they're doing very well in that housing.
And that was because of COVID, actually.
Yeah, because COVID sparked the government to invest all this money into housing.
Well, some good things came of that then.
Exactly, that was the silver lining.
And do you have the feeling that the government is still investing more in housing, or was this just during those couple of years and now it's kind of dried up again?
I think that everybody saw the emergency
Right.
when the parks were filled, and it was the complaints from the public about the parks being filled that of course sparks the government into action. But now a lot of times people think, well, you house 500 people, why is there now a new problem on Pandora? And the trouble is that homelessness is a cycle, and it doesn't take much for people to fall through those cracks. We see more and more people who are being run evicted and ending up on the street for the very first time. And so that's being exasperated. So we need the government to really stay on top of this. I mean, the emergency isn't over.
I was looking at Google Street View just to send like shots of where the office was to crew, and I was looking at 919 Pandora, and it looked completely different in 2017.
Yeah.
And I was shocked because, you know, I only moved to here with my partner a couple years ago. So I was like, wow, that's a substantial change.
It is.
Now, was the crisis as pronounced as it is now, but just it was in other places?
There was more people in parks.
In parks.
So they started to shut down all the parks because of neighbor complaints. But unless you provide them a home,
Right.
they end up on the streets. Now they're camping on Pandora because everybody who works for our place is trained in the use of Narcan. So if they overdose, they know that people are there that can save their lives. So people feel safe being around Island Health and our place because they know that if something goes wrong, we're there to help.
Yeah, I've seen this actually on my commute. I often do go down Pandora, so I have actually seen you attending to people having an overdose. But fentanyl is particularly terrifying as a synthetic opioid that is so much stronger than what we ever would have had historically.
It is, and fentanyl replaced heroin. It's very difficult to find heroin on the streets now, and it's kind of sad to say that heroin is a softer drug than fentanyl, but it is. And so in the early days, we saw, well, thousands and thousands of deaths because nobody knows how much fentanyl is in a dose. It's not like your drug dealers are certified chemists. They're just putting it together. It doesn't take much for a few grains of fentanyl to make its way into crack cocaine, for example, which shouldn't have an opioid, but it's quite easy for that to move in. And so people are overdosing or having a fatal poisonous reaction.
I know that there are urban legends that are propagated often by police officers in different places that just by being in the same room as fentanyl, or they get an overdose, or they would be. But it is such a thing that if you do touch some of it and you have no expectation or experience with fentanyl, you can have an overdose, although not trying to take drugs.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and so we have to be quite strict in allowing smoking in our buildings, for example, because if people are smoking fentanyl, they're exhaling fentanyl smoke.
Oh, wow.
And that can be damaging for the staff and for other residents.
To the point of even having an overdose?
Not so much an overdose, but having an adverse reaction.
Right.
So on the
God, that's
left-hand
terrifying.
side here, this is my place.
My place, yep. So we've been to our place, now we're at my place.
Yeah. So my place opened actually several years before COVID in response to a tent city that was happening on the court lawn.
Okay.
So in the law courts and people wanted that tent city to end. And so this was the former Boys and Girls Club.
Okay.
And then there's a big gymnasium in here. And what we did is we set up, at first it was just mats on the floor to get people in. But as the years have progressed, what we have done is we've now put in cubicles. So they don't have a roof and they don't have a front door, but it's a cubicle, so it's semi-private. But the good thing about this is it's 24/7. There's always supports. And there's access to showers and washrooms in this building. You can store your belongings there, so you're not scrambling to find where can you put your most precious belongings while you go look for work, or while you go to a doctor's appointment or a dental appointment where you start to rebuild your life.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a lot quieter than our place.
It is, and I mean, when it first opened, people had a lot of concerns because Central Middle School is directly across the street from us. And so there was a lot of concern about the students being that close. And when we first opened, a lot of parents were kind of very afraid, very up in arms. And it was actually the students of Central Middle School that came forward and said, no, we actually welcome them. And the students talked around their parents. So we had open houses so they could come and meet the people who were moving in. We have clean teams at all of our sites that come out and they will go around the neighborhood for several blocks, picking up needles, if they find needles, picking up glass, picking up litter, picking up cigarette butts, to show that they're taking pride in this neighborhood too. And so we've even had social studies students from the school have come over and done classes with the people who are here, and they've also came and hosted some barbecues, some hot dogs and stuff like that with the residents. So it's been very, very rewarding for everybody.
I love that. So residents were absolutely terrified that this would become, some horrible drug site, whatever, but it's actually become a really positive thing in the community, even in connection and collaboration with the school.
It is, yeah, and most people that walk by wouldn't know that this is a big shelter for people.
I'm going to be just completely honest, this is actually part of my commute. I had no idea. I drive past here all the time. Where's your next?
So next we're going to go to Caledonia, which is also affectionately known as Tiny Town.
We were talking about Narcan, and it's possible that some of the people who are in our who are watching the show don't know what that is. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about Narcan and how it saves lives?
So Narcan was a drug or a counter agent to fentanyl. So it was originally designed because fentanyl is used in almost every surgery that you go into the hospital for. So in case someone got too much fentanyl, Narcan was invented. That basically it comes in and it blocks the opioid receptors, which stops any overdose instantly. So it's a life-saving drug. Without that particular drug, the death rate on our streets would be apocalyptic. It would be, you'd be talking hundreds of thousands of deaths. So Narcan is a necessity. And more people are being trained in it. There's two types. One is an injection. It's just simply an injection in the muscle. The other one is a nasal, where you can put it in someone's nose and hit the squeeze and it shoots the Narcan into their nose. Now, one of the troubles is if you have someone who's a long-time opioid user, is that the Narcan blocks the opioid receptors instantly, which is how it avoids an overdose. But what that means is it basically puts an opioid user into instant withdrawal.
Right.
So a lot of times you're saving their life, but they'll come up angry because you've put them into withdrawal and they start to go into a sickness. And so it's that becomes very difficult as well for paramedics and for people treating overdose symptoms.
Well, I also did a training for Narcan because I also wanted to know, after I went down to Pandora and I saw somebody dying, and I thought, well, what if there wouldn't be our place right there? You know, I want to be able to do something. And so when I did this training with, I believe, a woman from our place, she told me that it's also important to be absolutely sure that a person is having an overdose. Being unresponsive, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are having an overdose if they just seem to be sleepy. And that can actually be really bad because you essentially put them into withdrawal, meaning that they need a fix faster. And also they're incredibly angry because they weren't even having an overdose.
Yeah, it is. It's a challenge. And also a lot of the people who are down on Douglas, for example, and they might be using alcohol, they could pass out, and then people are giving them Narcan because they're passed out. Fortunately, Narcan doesn't do any damage to someone who's on alcohol.
I haven't had the opportunity to administer it, and I have to say I'm a little anxious about if it ever happens, because there's so much that you can do wrong. And
yeah, well, that's why they're also starting to, at the university, for example, University of Victoria, they're introducing the nasal spray, Narcan,
right,
now, because a lot of people were shy about the needle.
So we're talking a lot about drugs, but that is definitely not the only reason why a person becomes homeless.
If you're on the street, there's a very good chance that you will become addicted, because when your day-to-day life is such a struggle, you're looking for an escape.
Right.
And that's a real challenge, because the drugs are cheap. So whereas, 8 years ago, almost most of the addicts on the street were either heroin users or alcohol users. You won't find too many people who are only addicted to alcohol anymore, because it's very difficult and expensive to get alcohol. A lot of the alcoholics would have switched to rubbing alcohol or even hand sanitizer because it was cheaper than beer or whiskey. But now they've kind of put that away behind glass, protected it, and so their only option then was to switch to cheaper opioids.
Right.
And so that's become a much higher risk for people.
How quickly can you become addicted to fentanyl? I mean,
almost immediately, in the sense that it's, one person told me on the street that opioids are like all the love your mother never gave you. And a lot of times that's what people are looking for. I mean, a lot of times that's even why people get a pet dog, is for that unconditional love. And that's what fentanyl and heroin and opioids make you feel, which is very scary, because I mean, who doesn't want that? And once you experience it, you want to keep experiencing it. That's why they call it chasing the dragon, because it will never be quite as good as that first time again, but it takes people away. And you think about it, if your life has gone to heck and you're living on the streets, you want something that takes you away. And that's what opioids do.
or a pet dog.
Or a pet dog.
Do you see a lot of success stories, kind of people managing to get out of these positions?
I don't see as many success stories as I would like, but I see enough of them to keep me going.
Right.
So I mean, I do have people that come and visit me in the office that have been sober for a year, sober for 6 months, that just want to say thanks, for someone who listens to them. And that's really what it's all about, is those people who have gotten to a point and they're still alive to be able to make that change. And that's one of the troubles that I worry about with fentanyl, is that the death rate is so high that people don't often stay alive long enough to make that decision to to make that choice. So on my left here, this is Caledonia. So inside, this is a closed community, 30 units. It reminds me a lot of, I grew up in Scotland, so it reminds me a lot of a holiday camp, like where I used to go to. They're usually by the ocean though, not by a baseball park, when I was a kid. And basically inside it becomes a community. Everybody knows everybody, everybody looks out for everybody. There are staff here 24/7 that provide supports for people. But what I really love about it is that if you want time by yourself, you can go into your cabin. You've got a bed in there, you've got a TV, you've got some home comforts. But as soon as you want community, you just simply step outside of your cabin, you're now in community. And you see the people getting together all the time. And I mean, North Park neighborhood has been fantastic. You know, when we first opened, there people were coming in with muffins and with clothing and really welcoming people to the neighborhood. And it's funny, in the last couple of weeks, I've actually had phone calls from the media, from CTV and Czech, both asking if it was open because it's been so quiet that people were wondering if people were actually occupying it.
And these are mainly container houses. Container houses with a couple shared spaces as well.
Exactly. You have washrooms and showers that are shared. There's 5 of them. So there's still that. You have to trek. You have to go to your washroom. Yeah, there's no cooking in your unit. So there's still steps beyond this. But this gets you prepared for that next step. And each step moves you closer to that independence that you're looking for.
Right.
And everybody in here has moved from places like my place. And we've already had some people that have come in here, done really well, and when an opening came up in the hotel, they have moved to the hotel. And so there is a turnover of people as we stabilize and get them the help they need. The whole point of having these types of graduated steps is that we want it to be so that nobody ends up back on the street.
Right.
So that they can take a step back and maybe they go from one of the hotels back to my place, in a sense. So they're not going back to the street, but they're going back to sort of a lower level of support, and maybe that's a better fit for them until they get through a particularly difficult patch, and then they resume their journey on these steps.
I can imagine also, I mean, just with any big goal, and this is something I can also relate to, is if you don't have, if you just see the huge journey you have to take to get there, then it's gonna seem insurmountable. But like baby steps, also baby steps backwards. Like if you're not, you thought you were ready for a certain level, but then you end up going backwards one step. It doesn't feel the same as ending up back at the sort of ground zero point where we were before.
Yeah. And we also find that, you know, like sometimes when people they've got a mental health issue, but they haven't got a proper diagnosis, or they haven't been taking their prescription. A lot of times once they get into some form of housing, start to stabilize, and they can start taking their medication regularly, they find that all of a sudden now they need less supports. And so they might say, you know what, I would really like to get into market rent where I have complete control. And so we can also do rent subsidies to help people that are at that stage. And then there are other people who, once they get into housing, they start to find out that their mental health issues are far more complex and they need more support.
Right.
And so that's where maybe being housed with an not-for-profit isn't enough for them. Maybe they need to be in an island health facility that has a lot more medical support.
I can definitely, like some of what you're saying, because I feel like everybody sort of exists on a spectrum. So for example, I have OCD. It's not really an issue in my life right now,
Yeah.
but I know that if I don't have enough time for myself, or if I'm not in a place where I feel safe, a lot of these issues get a lot larger just because I'm not meeting my needs.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think it's you know, it's how when you're an introvert and you've done too much outside work and you get overwhelmed, you need just a little decompression time. You need a place to kind of huddle in and chill, you know, which is one of the reasons why I like Tiny Town, for example, because that gives you that opportunity. You can be introverted and then extroverted when you want, you know, and I think that's important, just to have that space to yourself, you know, and that's the thing you don't find in a lot of times in the shelter space when you're on a night mat, you know, at the community center, for example. it's difficult to find your own private space.
Yeah.
And so that's why a lot of times people, you'll see them in tents on the boulevard, and they don't want to go into a shelter because they don't want to give up that semblance of privacy. Even though being in a tent isn't very private, you at least can block out the sight of other people.
Which is why you kind of want people to be aware of all of the many different steps in the journey, Dante's Inferno, to complete health and happiness.
Absolutely. You'll find that most people, when they come directly out of a tent or sleeping on a sidewalk to housing, their chances of success are low because it is too much. It's too overwhelming. You know, I mean, as each step progresses, you learn more skills. It's not always the first time that you go into recovery that you're successful. A lot of times it's the fifth time.
Yeah.
You know, and so we learn things as we progress, and we learn what works for us and what doesn't. You can't look at everybody who's homeless and say, I have a solution, because it isn't one solution. It has to be multiple solutions, multiple prongs, multiple levels of support, and you really have to look at everybody as an individual.
I mean, it can happen to anyone, depending on the things that happen in your life. I never ended up like living on actual streets, but there have been periods of my life where I was homeless, and I was counting on just like friends and people who I trusted, where I could stay until I got back on my feet. This was a while ago.
Yeah.
But you know, I also wonder sometimes, it could have gone so many different ways if my luck had been slightly different.
Yeah.
In these sort of dark patches, I definitely benefited from the fact that fentanyl was not in any way, shape, fashion, or form a thing on my radar screen.
Absolutely. And so many people have lost all those supports around them, and so they're really on their own. You see a lot of seniors coming in whose pension pays for their housing but doesn't pay for their meals.
Right.
And so they're coming to our place for those meals.
Okay.
So this is the next step in the journey.
Okay.
So this is individual hotel rooms for people. So you have kind of like a bachelor suite. Some of them have little kitchenettes in them. Some of them have balconies. So they're quite nice. And there's also staff here 24/7. So they have those supports. And if we bring a couple in, we make sure there's a room for both partners. The couple can choose to have one room as a bedroom, one as a living room. But if there's any domestic issues or any falling outs, we want to make sure there's a safe space for each person in that couple. And you can live the rest of your life there if you like.
Where's your next?
So now we're going to visit the real hope end of the spectrum. This is our New Roads Therapeutic Recovery Community out in View Royal. And this is a 9-month to 2-year program for the men, and it's seen some really fantastic success rates.
Okay.
Whereas we found that like a 30-day program has almost 100% of people relapse within 24 to 48 hours. It's more like a small holiday for your body than actual recovery.
Right.
And it really takes a minimum of 6 months before you can really start to develop those skills that you need. I mean, I was talking to one of the guys and he was saying that he's actually not learning rehabilitation, he's actually learning habilitation because he hadn't learned those skills. It's like if he got angry at someone, he punched them.
Right.
And in regular community, we have to find alternative ways to express our anger or express our frustration rather than becoming violent. So there's a lot of learning to be done.
I live up in Fernwood, not far from the tiny town, and there's one park, Stadacona, I think it's called.
Yep.
And it was inhabited by a lot of homeless people in tents, and that was actually, you know, it was a place where you could camp.
Yeah.
Some local residents had this petition saying, "Oh, get rid of the homeless people in Stadacona Park," and just making this whole thing about it, and it was just like so dehumanizing.
Yeah.
Since then, they've been kicked out of the park, and the park has had like this whole greening and cleaning, and of course there is some part of me that likes walking through the park more now. Of course there is, but at the same time, like I see that kind of stuff, and I find it really unsettling.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, nobody should be in a park, nobody should be on a sidewalk, nobody should be in the doorway.
Yeah.
We want people in housing, but you can't move people unless you provide that housing. And that's always been the gap, is there's just not enough housing and shelter for everybody. And I mean, you're even seeing that in the rental market, how difficult it is for young people to rent a place.
It is a conversation I have with my friends that, like, if I have to move for some reason, I don't know if I'll stay in Victoria, because it's you know, the odds of finding a place that's nice for a decent budget. You know, since we moved here, the rate has gone up. The average rate has gone up by $500-600, and that's just in 2 years. If your roots are here, your family is here, and you don't want to leave, or you're not able to leave, then what do you do?
Yeah, and I think that's the whole problem with making housing a private enterprise, where a for-profit enterprise. And now so many, we're seeing it all the time now with seniors that are paying private rent, is that they're in a place that isn't working for them, but they don't want to move because their rent will double. And so they're stuck at some place that isn't working for them, that has stairs, for example, and they've just had hip surgery, or it has no supports, or their bathroom isn't accessible to them. But they're staying there because they can't afford to go anyplace else. We didn't look ahead. Our crystal ball must have been broken, because we all knew that there was this massive wave of boomers that were going to retire. And not all of them were going to be wealthy. I don't know how we came up with this idea that they were all going to be super wealthy, because there's a whole bunch of them who aren't, who just are living on their pensions. And we knew this bubble was coming, and we did nothing about it, because no government that's elected every 4 years wants to say, you know what, we need to spend several $1 billion preparing for this, and it's going to go on your income tax. Everybody would be opposed to that, but that's the trouble, is we only think in short terms, and we need the government to think in longer terms and to look at these trends and go, this is now an emergency, and it's going to cost us 5 times as much as it would have cost us if we looked at this 20 years ago.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's easier to make a mess than to clean it up, right?
Exactly, yeah.
I feel like everybody means well. That's the thing that I don't get around here. Like, there's a lot of community mindedness. There's a lot of volunteerism. There's like so much. There's so much. You would think that a population like this would have systems in place to take care of its people.
Yeah.
So why don't we?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is that because a government is only in power for 4 years before they have to be re-elected,
Yeah.
they think in those short periods of time. I almost think we should do away with elections, and it should almost be like the draft, where we all have to do 2 or 3 years as a politician, and we're just drafted, and we're not going to be re-elected, so we don't have to worry about it, and we're just looking out for everybody else, and our job is to do the best for the country and do the best for everybody that lives in the country. And that way you would take the politics out of politics and just be there for the good of man.
I need a moment to process it, but I think that might be brilliant. Because, I mean, it is still democracy, just in a completely different way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you would have a few people who just like to prank around with it, but, you know, after 3 years, they'd be gone, so.
Yeah, exactly, and you'd have, you'd pick people from all different walks of life, so you'd have a real mix there, and then they'd have to agree on what was best for the country.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it would work or not, who knows, but.
I wonder if we'll ever see any sort of like improvements along these ways. I mean, of course, you have organizations like Our Place, but you are a charity. You aren't like an initiative of the government.
And without the support of our donors, we couldn't do what we do.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't exist. We get government funding for the housing sites that we're managing, but we don't get government funding for all those extra supports that we're doing. The meals, for example, the drop-in, the showers, those are all supported by donors. And if the donors turn their backs on us, we're out of business. And it's like sometimes people will come out and they'll say, oh, I wish Our Place would move off Pandora to hide homelessness away and to hide the struggles that people are facing away. And it's like, but hiding a problem doesn't solve it.
No, it's like you always have with these mega sporting events, Olympics and so forth. They just like move all the poor areas. Yeah. They just move like everybody to like this poor area 50 miles away.
Yeah. You move them away from services, then they stand a chance of dying or getting even worse.
Did not realize the galloping goose would have so many of these little obstacles.
You need the Batmobile where it can shrink.
I know, right?
The bad guys are after them.
Nice mustache.
Thank you. Cheers. So one thing that's quite interesting that we're doing today is we are going up to View Royal, which is definitely about as far as a pedicab can travel, and as we're seeing on the Galloping Goose, in some cases a little bit farther.
Yeah.
What you've told me about this next spot, New Roads, does sound very encouraging once we get there.
That's right. Yeah, it's the building doesn't look like much from the outside, but as soon as you enter the courtyard, which when we took it over, the courtyard was just a big gravel pit meant for parking cars on.
Yeah.
And it would be unrecognizable to people that knew it as the gravel pit. Because we actually, when we first took it over, we took it over because, again, there was tent cities at the courthouse where we're trying to house people. And a lot of the people who were in tents didn't want to go indoors. So we actually, the prison was sitting empty. So we got permission from the government to take it over to manage it. And we opened up a housing site called Choices.
Choices.
And the reason why we called it Choices is because you had the choice of putting your tent in this gravel middle, or you could have one of the rooms inside. And so that allowed people that choice. And so a lot of people set up tents in that courtyard. We were bringing in meals and supports and things like that, but they could set up a tent. And then we had them help us paint the inside to try and de-institutionalize the prison.
Right.
We helped people paint their rooms, and if they wanted a room, they could choose what color to paint it, what color to paint the door. We removed all those prison-style locks, so they had like normal locks. And then within 4 months, everybody who was outside had decided to move inside because winter was coming. And then we were able to move everybody into housing, into one of the hotels that the government bought.
Yeah.
And then that allowed us to then do a major renovation with the help of Hero Works to transform this former youth custody center into what it is today, which is the Therapeutic Recovery Community Center.
Nice. Which we'll be seeing in a second.
And this is the garden that the men tend to.
Okay.
And they've done a fantastic job on this. When you consider this was just a big gravel pit before,
Yeah.
and now it's a little slice of paradise.
This program is usually 9 months long versus a lot of the traditionals, which are only 3 months long. So after 9 months, when you've completed all the courses and classes, you can graduate this program, you become an alumni. So we come back to give back to the new residents to show them what it's like. So I was actually here 11 months and I just passed my 1-year date 2 weeks ago.
Okay. And can you tell me a little bit about yourself, just like the journey that brought you here?
Yeah, I can. Typical for a lot of us, I ended up falling back into addiction, ended up downtown on Pandora. I was brought into the hospital for help. I'm not originally from Victoria, so I didn't know anything about this place. So I came into New Roads June 21st of last year. And then, like I say, I spent 11 months here, went through the counseling and all the classes, and now I actually volunteer down at our place.
Okay. Oh, you volunteer, so
Yeah,
kind
I
of...
volunteer on the weekends, helping serve food and clean up after the people that come in to eat. So this is our greenhouse. We grow a lot of our own vegetables here, obviously.
Yeah.
This is one of the smoking areas that the residents are allowed to use. Smoking and vaping is allowed, but only here.
Okay.
The gardens are all managed by the guys. We have an outside crew,
Yep.
an inside crew, and a kitchen crew. So that's one of the things you do here is WAT, which is work as therapy. This is our commemorative garden here for people that we've lost.
Oh.
And one of the biggest differences about this place is that it's not just about getting sober, right? We can get sober. It's teaching us, you know, the traumas or whatever has happened in our life that causes us to use. So between the classes we have here, the really intense counseling, it helps us figure those things out so that we don't fall back into our addiction. To this side, there's a giant koi pond. There's just lots of peaceful places that we can sit, and whether we're just talking with another resident, with a counselor, or just sitting and reflecting on our own, this place is peace. Like, I've only been gone a month. I miss this place. This is my peace. This is where I learned to finally figure out what peace is in my life, was what I did here. I can talk to staff.
As alumni, you're allowed to.
Encouraged.
Encouraged, yeah.
Oh yes, yeah. And part of that is our giving back, showing the new residents. Some of these guys have only been here a few weeks. Right. So they're still not figuring out what's going on yet. I mean, it's a nice place, but they don't understand anything yet. So when senior residents or alumni can come back and spend time with them, it shows them this place works. And here's why it works. We also have a second stage house, which is where I live.
Right.
So we have a house called JMac House. That's part of our place. I live there now. I just moved out of this center to make room for more people to come in. A big part of this program isn't just get you sober and get you out the door. It's they help you, whether it's you're going to go to school or you're going to go to work, they help you get that figured out. You have to have a sponsor to leave here, somebody in the community. At about the 6-month mark, we start going on outings, escorted with another senior member to meet people in AA, NA, and make those connections before we go back into community full time. But they also help us line up, like I say, schooling, work, volunteering, housing. Right? They're not just going to release us out the gate with nowhere to go. Like, it's truly a community. It's not just a treatment center. Recovery's forever.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we're always in recovery. There's no cure.
Yeah.
It's about using the tools we learn in places like this to stay in recovery.
Yeah.
And the important thing about alumni, like Sean, is that it shows the newcomers that it's possible.
Yeah.
You know, because when you're first coming in these doors, you don't always know if it's possible. You know, your life up to this point has been chaos, and you meet people who have been in the exact same situation you have, and they've, you know, done the program and they're doing extremely well, and that's the most inspiring thing you can have.
Yeah, I don't volunteer to have something to do. I volunteer to give back. Right? So I can talk to somebody while they're sitting eating their meal and say, I was on the sidewalk a year ago. Right? I'm living proof it works. It's uncovered right now because the blankets all have to dry out, but we have our own sweat lodge, and we have elders that come in, and about every 3 months we put on a sweat for the guys. And this is a transforming action for most of the guys that take part. We'll get 10 or 11 guys in here at a time with one elder out, one elder in. This is an amazing thing. A lot of the guys have never experienced it.
For a lot of the guys who are, you know, Aboriginal themselves, it really resonates because they've lost contact with their roots. Because all of those things are healing, you know, and especially First Nations, so much of what they do is about healing and medicine, and that's how people are getting healthy. It's quite something to see.
But, and that's the thing, is acceptance, right? Most of us haven't had that for whatever reason, and there's a lot of shame and guilt around addiction, and that goes away when you get here.
The scene that we saw in Pandora is coming from that embarrassment of your own addiction, of your own struggles, and not wanting people to see that. You know, and so you see how much healing needs to be done to let that go, because it's protective, right?
Oh, it is.
You know, and anger becomes protective. And so learning how to accept yourself and love yourself and use all those skills to move forward is a huge step for people.
Most of the things they do here is teaching you something, not just recovery. Because recovery is great. Getting sober is great.
But what do you do once you've recovered?
Well, yeah, because the world's still the same when you go out, right? You still got to learn how to deal with those issues, and a lot of those issues are what drove us into our addiction. We didn't know how to deal with that stuff, right? Even something as simple, we just walked by the cafeteria, but when we all sit and eat meals, right? You have to clean up your own dishes, you have to wipe your own spot, you have to put your own chair away. You have to make your bed every morning. It's checked every morning. You have to be up at a certain time. These are all skills that most of us lost track of. So starting day one when you come in here, they start reestablishing all those. That's just sort of reinforcing your basics so that when you graduate, you still got to deal with the stuff in the world, but you don't even have to think. You just make your bed in the morning.
Right.
You just clean up after yourself. We have a sign in the gym, I should have showed you, and it's one of my favorite sayings, that the opposite of addiction is connection. If we lose that, most of us struggle.
Completely unrelated to everything else we've been talking about, you're actually a rather successful novelist of thriller novels.
Yeah. I've written 12 novels. My last one actually got shortlisted for the International Thriller Writers Award, so that was a big thrill for me. I got to go to New York and meet, R.L. Stein and a lot of the big names that I've admired, Walter Mosley. So that's been really, really good. It's something that I've always been extremely passionate about.
At the same time, you're also a person with a very strong social conscience, obviously. I was wondering if there's a intersection, let's say, between you as a novelist and also you as a social worker.
Yeah, well, I mean, novelists steal from everybody they meet.
Right.
Little quirks that people have, or little, the way they look, or the way they dress, or the way they talk. And so you can't help but be influenced by the people around you. I tend to have sections of my novels that maybe deal with homelessness or deal with drug addiction issues, just because that's what I'm immersed in.
Yeah.
My novels are quite dark, so they're other dark thrillers, and I think that's because of being a journalist in my past, and also some of the injustice and cruelty that I see happening to people who have just fallen down in hard times.
It's funny because, on one hand, I feel like there's a lot of similarities between your life arc and mine. I have been a journalist, Monday Magazine, which you were working for as well. So there's that. But at the same time, you've had such a totally different arc as well.
Yeah, it's, I was quite fortunate that this job really, with our place, really melded with what I was doing with Monday Magazine. The social justice issues that we were reporting on, and that we were passionate about. And this really gave me a way to carry on that work. And one of my favorite parts of this job is when I do a story about one of the family members. We call everybody that we work with family members.
Right.
And so when I get to work with one of them and really tell their story, and seeing their reaction. I've had so many of the people that come, because I publish a newsletter 3 times a year, that come to get copies of that newsletter. And normally one of the first things they say is, I can't wait to show this to my mom, or my dad, or my brother, and that, or my kids. And that's so fulfilling, it really is.
I bet. You do feel like you have this opportunity to make a difference by producing these features on whichever topic, or you are introducing people to storytellers they wouldn't have otherwise met.
Yeah.
That was what I always loved about journalism.
Yeah.
But then to see what you're doing right now, in some ways, it's really not so different. If anything, it's just more laser focused.
It is, yeah. And what's interesting, I think, is a lot of journalists, when their career ends, for one reason or another, usually economic, when it ends, they tend to go into public relations for an oil company or whatever. And what I love about this is that I actually don't lie. My job is actually telling the truth.
Yeah.
And whereas a lot of public relations people, their job is to avoid the media, I actually get to embrace it because I'm telling worthwhile stories and wanting people to connect with something they might overlook.
Woo! Woo! This is fun. Oh my God! Oh Jesus! Woo! Oh. All right.